There's a few key themes that have come out, I think, from the various comments that have been made. Firstly, that there needs to be real accountability for the kinds of changes that are required. That we really need to think hard about mitigation. What does it really mean for companies to take bold leadership that contributes to taking our current trajectory and shifting it so that we have a means to a safe world? A piece of, around adaptation and resilience. What does it really mean to ensure that, in the communities which are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, that companies across their value chain are investing in ways that build the capability of those communities to be able to respond and also to be resilient in the face of climate change. Ensuring that benefits are shared fairly as we respond. A piece around the rule of law. How do we ensure that the rubric of law and governance and the institutions that we have actually serve us in advancing these interests? So there's some of the themes that have come out, but to open it back to the panel for kind of final thoughts that are going through your mind before we open it up to audience questions. I guess maybe start with you, Jackie. What is the biggest challenge that we face, and what would you like to see happen that's not currently happening that could help us really advance on this agenda? And just one minute each for the panelists, and then we'll open it up.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge that we face, I would say, is, particularly in the United States, is that we tend to only respond to crises when things reach the absolute worst point, and by that time it will be too late. So I would say that's the biggest challenge, really getting the United States to recognize the urgency of what needs to be done and to actually do it. What was the second half of the question?
What are the biggest obstacles?
Okay. Well, I'd say that's the biggest obstacle. And I think that also a lack of recognition of really, and the fact that they're the folks who are the most powerless to affect change are the ones who are the most impacted. And so therefore the people who are kind of sitting pretty without really feeling these impacts and seeing these impacts are the ones who hold the most power in terms of the shifts that we need to make. So I would say that's probably the biggest obstacle. Thank you.
Jim, why have some parts of the human rights community been so slow to engage on climate change? I mean, we still see a bit of a gulf within the human rights movement around this agenda. What's stopping us from integrating the struggles in a way that really creates a movement that will actually make the shift that we're looking to achieve?
Gosh, I don't know why parts of the global human rights movement could be accused of that, but I suppose they, to kind of add to what Jackie has said, and one of the things that for me needs to happen here is that it has to be about the kind of communities that you describe being integral to creating the solutions. So it's from an organization like our point of view, it's about our partners. It's about local communities in the 90 countries we work in, and for any other organization like ourselves, it's about the solutions, the local solutions being driven by local communities. And just to kind of to feed it back to, I suppose, the discussion in relation to companies themselves, one of the other areas that I think needs to be addressed very seriously and very urgently is the shift in balance in relation to risk. Because the risk currently is all on the community, it's all on the farmer, it's all on the worker. And the risk should be spread, the risk should be spread much more widely. We should have protection for farmers, for especially smallholder farmers who are producing a lot of the kind of materials that are required by large companies, and somehow ensuring that there is a balance there, and that they, when the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing are impacting them, that it's not devastation, and that includes fair wages, and it includes fair terms and conditions, but it also requires some form of insurance for crop failures and so on. So there's a wider agenda there that I think companies need to engage in. I think the fact that what will be signed this week has become the SDGs, I think, is a result rather than MDG Mark II. I think is a result of global civil society and global leadership actually bringing the two agendas together, which let's remember, wasn't really on the agenda 4 or 5 years ago. So so I think there have been some successes in that regard. I think it's now, I think people are now clear that it's a common agenda, but prioritizing what needs to be done and how urgently certain things need to be done is something that isn't quite there, and that's why this discussion and why COP is going to be so critical. I mean, we can't afford to have a Copenhagen Mark II. I mean, this is do or die. There isn't another way out here. I mean, as Mary has said in the past, if I can quote her, this isn't a kind of a global trade agreement where you can balance one thing off against the other. This is a zero sum. We've got to get this right.
So just conscious of time and inviting the panelists as we open up to questions to integrate some of their feedback. I believe we do have some questions from the audience, but we were going to start with a few esteemed colleagues that are here in the audience with us. Ed Cameron, who's with BSR, but has also been leading the policy work of We Mean Business, which is one of the world's largest coalitions now that brings together almost millions of companies around the world who are calling for bold climate action. Ed, what's your perspective? What do you think the challenge is here, and how do you think we can bring climate justice and human rights together in a way that enables us to make a safe and fair transition to the world that we want to live in? And feel free to come here.
I can say, okay. I'm going to get into trouble for this, but I feel I should respond first of all by saying that last week I watched, I think it was about 14 middle-aged, mostly white, mostly men, talk about the future of America. And I hope as they go forward that they find within themselves the intelligence and eloquence that Mr. Martinez, the 15-year-old guest from earlier, was able to show here tonight, because we could all do with that level of intelligence and elegance. What I want to say is, when I was thinking about my remarks, I'm a big Eleanor Roosevelt fan, and one of the things that was said about her when she died is that she would rather light a candle than curse the darkness. And I think we need to think of climate justice not just as a tool for liability and accountability and holding people's feet to the fire, but we have to think of it as an opportunity, a new toolkit to help businesses actually lead on climate and human rights, because that's what we're seeking to achieve. And I think this climate justice narrative, this climate justice toolkit, helps business leadership in a number of ways. First of all, it helps us properly diagnose the problem. It helps us to understand that climate change does undermine the realization of rights, that where human rights are absent, people become more vulnerable. Vulnerabilities are exacerbated. And that means that the workforce you depend upon in order to produce your goods and services, the customers that you depend upon in order to provide you with profits, those people are undermined. It also means that where climate ambition is lacking, rights, of course, are themselves continue to be undermined. So I think we need to look at this as an opportunity to strengthen the communities that work in our factories. I love the phrase from farm to fork. These are the communities that are subsequently agents of change to protecting our natural resources, our fundamental ecosystem services that provide us with the natural inputs towards our goods and services. I think it's also important to bear in mind, one of the things we've learned from BSR is that a rights narrative actually strengthens people like John within their companies to be able to argue on ambition. We've had a number of companies who come to us over the last number of months and say to us, we can't take climate to the board. It's not in their wheelhouse. They don't really understand it. But we can take human rights to the board. We've had companies like Intel and Pfizer and Levi's tell us this issue. We've had other companies tell us we can't take human rights to our board, but we can take climate. So by linking these two issues together, what we do is we create a vocabulary of arguments that enables us to speak about this issue in new ways and create new constituencies of demand to actually move forward on this issue. And I think we're seeing that with Pope Francis's visit this week, that we have a new person on the agenda. It's not Al Gore anymore, it's not Paul Pullman anymore, with respect, but it's a new voice that's now coming to the fore and expanding that constituency of demand. And then finally, I think what we're seeing is a tool that enables company to think beyond their own four walls, to understand that resilience isn't just about climate-proofing your infrastructure or putting up a flood defense. It is about providing access to financial services to vulnerable populations so that they can rebound from shocks. It is about providing access to decision-making, information, and justice so that farmers can understand when to sow and when to reap. It is about, for example, thinking about your women in your workforce. One of the key statistics that always hits me on climate change is that 90% of fatalities in Bangladesh to extreme weather events are women. This is not because they're exposed to an extreme weather event. It's because they lack socio-political, economic assets that they can deploy in service of resilience. And I think if companies begin to look at this, they will realize that they can do far more than they're currently doing to take on a leadership role by using this climate justice lens. So I would really encourage us to think of climate justice as an opportunity as opposed to merely something else to hold the feet to the fire.
Good. Thank you, Ed. And I think we have Dimfna as well from the Clinton Initiative. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Dimfna van der Lands, Clinton Climate Initiative. Just to make sure I'm not the Clinton Global Initiative, which people always think I am. Two observations for myself. First of all, I'm honored to be here and to listen to your inspirational comments and contributions. As a single mother of a 10-year-old young girl who is aspiring to be a marine biologist, I'm especially humbled to be with you and to listen to your three voices. And by the way, you have a beautiful voice as well. More than anything, I think they're the voices that we truly need to listen to. And so I took deliberate notes, but I'm hopeful that I can find you on YouTube and listen to your text more diligently. I am definitely not in your target audience group for the rep thing. But I'm sure I will be able to figure it out once I've listened to it more carefully. So two observations from my perspective in the Clinton Climate Initiative. I think we look at climate change truly as an underlying cause for many of the things that we're observing in the world today. And I really appreciated your picture, Marcella, of the horrible things that are happening in East or the north of Africa and the Middle East and the impact it has on Europe as well, and our ability to reflect on our responsibilities there, which for a very long time in Europe we felt we were truly doing a really wonderful job, and we aren't. I mean, I think our ability to really look at that and think about the consequences of what undoubtedly isn't only impacted by climate change. So there's many other factors that are impacting the migration that we're seeing, but climate change definitely plays into it. And so I think for a very long time, these tensions have been built up. And so climate change impacts that region's ability to have access to scarce water resources, to have access to secure food security, to have access to energy services that are now diminishing. And therefore conflicts arise that aren't only driven by climate change, but climate change is a fundamental underlying cause of them. And so that's my first observation of today's conversation. The second one is a challenge for the corporate sector, really, which is I'm always struck by the fact that when you think about what you are doing and articulating your contributions to these issues, you speak in the language of silos. You speak in the language of a sector or our supply chain. It is a very narrow approach to this very difficult and challenging issue that's in front of us. And so within the Clinton Climate Initiative, we think about these issues and we try to address them by using a whole systems approach, always, every single time. And for us, there is no distinction between climate change and water and land and waste and energy. All of that is connected. And only if we look at all of those elements, will we be able to create resilient communities. And I think I'll just close by I'm hopeful that I remember this correctly, but I think one of your lines in your song was that the system divides us, but we cannot be divided, or it can't divide us. And I think that's exactly what this point is of this conversation, that if we continue to think about these interventions in silos, we truly won't create the necessary consequences. We create more unintended consequences, and that is not going to help us in the long term. So the question or the observation I would have for the private sector is really how do you think about moving outside of this silo and moving outside of your own sector to use a whole systems approach? Thank you.
Thank you.
And now to questions from many of you, to the panel, or to Ed and Daphne. One at the back there. Sorry. Dimfna, sorry.
Nope.
Just speak loudly, John.
I mean,
We'll hear you.
we can hear you.
Right, John Morrison, Institute of Human Rights Business. Just to the two businesses. You talked about your supply chains, but bridging also to the interventions from others about mobilizing youth, mobilizing all of us, and I think we did at the beginning that we're kind of all responsible, aren't we? Yeah. What about the other end of your value chains? How are you mobilizing consumers?
I can go first, sure. You know, the reason this is a business imperative for us is that it's critical to our consumers and increasingly critical to our most powerful set of consumers, the millennials, who are empowered and have the ability to influence and communicate like no other generation before them. And so they are helping lead the way by us being intimate with them and understanding what their needs are. And they are shaping our strategies because it's important to them. And one of the questions that I didn't get a chance to answer was why is this, what's the barrier? And the answer is because the millennials aren't quite powerful enough yet, but they're about to be. And we're about to have 15-year-olds who are going to have discretionary income and make choices for businesses based on businesses that can live their values, and they can feel like spending money allows them to contribute to the greater good. And so we activate by listening, and then we provide them products. We're gonna provide 250 organic products because that's an area that's important to people in the markets where in Europe it's bio, and in the U.S. it's organic. It's understanding that simplicity and transparency is table stakes. And that's the way that you start building a relationship with them that's differential. We probably haven't done as good a job, in all fairness, around engaging them in the discussion of what world do we want them to, what world do they want us to leave to them. I have a 16-year-old and a 4.5-year-old, and neither one of them have the chutzpah that Mr. Martinez does at the end to help shape that discussion. But clearly we're not doing enough in that area, and that's enlightened me a little bit today.
Okay, thank you. Great question, John. How do we engage with consumers? Well, just as you were talking in many ways, one through innovation and in our products and the use of our products, whether we have compressed aerosols or we have create and innovate products that use much less water or have a much less impact in the environment, but that is in the area of the innovation and creating the awareness with that. Then we have brands with social mission and environmental mission. For instance, you heard of Lifebuoy. We did a whole campaign around sanitation and hand washing and the right of the child, etc. Dove with women's at large self-confidence, but increasingly on empowerment. So we are connecting with the consumers, and certainly with the younger consumer, and we are engaging even in innovation through the Foundry, through many of the projects that we have. Then the consumers and the youth are co-creating with us. So we think that if we are able to engage at that level, to bring the solutions that you address. I mean, you were asking about being part of the solution, right? And that we can really connect and impact change. But the element that is not a Unilever element or General Mills element, but an element at large with consumers. And David Schilling left, but he would recall my early years when I was in another industry, the first time and it was apparel, the first time that he were to come to meet us and discuss all these issues, I were to ask him, what brands are you wearing? And he were to laugh, and then we got into all this discussion. But I wanted to make a point on the issue that consumer activism sometimes doesn't translate to the support of the companies and the brands who are making the difference. And let us make no mistake. I mean, to really move from point A to point B, there is a cost. And if companies who are investing on that, co-creating and working with the stakeholders, your point, I mean, doing it together, but there is a cost to that. Consumers are not really rewarding that, but we are in a very cost-driven, price-driven economy. Then, I mean, that's true sustainability too, right? I mean, we need to have that. And companies like your company or like my company, we are investing in the future. That's what we want. I just talked already about how we see it. But let us make no mistake. I personally do not believe that consumers are really quite active and stepping up. And I think that is a very important part of the equation. And whether we connect or not, and it creates fantastic discussions, internally and certainly among, academia as well. Do we really need to engage with consumers, or we need to cut out all the other options and just keep only the good options? And how long will it take us to get there? I give you an example. We talk about the compressed aerosols, much better carbon footprint, et cetera, et cetera. If you go to the consumer and someone sees a little aerosol versus a larger one, same content, more quantity actually in the package, is gonna still, buy the larger one.
Right.
And
Because you've taken value out of the smaller one.
yeah,
You're giving me less.
So we need to engage. When I talk about engaging and awareness and really coming and innovation and doing it together, I'm talking about all those. So John, thank you for reminding us that, but we need many more of you around the room to really help us, step up, dial up with the consumers.
Jim.
Behind the brands.
I had to shake my head a little bit furiously there, sorry, Marcella, but
Okay.
I mean, the consumers are the ones that have really mobilized our campaign and the Behind the Brands campaign. 100,000 people signed up to a campaign that was directed at Coca-Cola in relation to land grabbing within their value chains. And Coca-Cola had to make a decision, and I'm talking about enlightened companies like yourselves who are very much at the forefront of this, but I think the consumers have done quite a strong job. Now, we do have to sell things to consumers. That's the point. Not just sell product, but sell messages as well. And certainly, the millennials that you've described are a different breed of consumer to maybe some of the rest of us in the room here. And there's a duty to mobilize them, to engage them. But I think the rewards will be there in the longer run, and I think that's clear, and the power is there.
I'm very excited that you do the work that you do. Otherwise, we would not be able to move in the way that we move. But it's still 100,000 people in the context of the population that we have, even in the US. So you need to do a larger job. We need to.
Sorry, that was on that one campaign in the space of a few weeks. There are hundreds of thousands more and many others besides. But the point is that they're vocal, and oftentimes vocal consumers represent maybe multiple times the ones that don't say anything.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the people who complain. I don't know what the stat is. 1 in 10 won't complain, but or the other way around, whatever it is. But you know what I'm saying.
We're getting at an interesting tension here, but also an interesting opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Which is that it's the ability of civil society to mobilize consumers that creates the license for businesses to take more leadership on this agenda.
Yeah.
And the more we lose sight of that, the less we make progress. So how can we become more strategic, more tactical at how we actually mobilize those consumers? I mean, it might be nice to hear from the generation, that has started this off. I was 15 when the Millennium Development Goals were being agreed to. And I've seen the change in that last 15 years. But you're 15 now as we come to these global goals that are being agreed to. And they're not just about a few countries, but they're about transforming our behaviors, our attitudes, our beliefs as human beings. And even in companies which are not just machines, they're people. We need to change attitudes and beliefs. What is your perspective on your generation? How do you make decisions? To what extent do you select a product or a company based on what they stand for or what their behaviors are as companies? What kind of impact does that have on your decision? And do you think that you would select a different brand based on your knowledge of the company and what they were doing on this agenda?
Yeah, I definitely think that as young consumers especially, we're looking for, more than anything, we're looking for what's real now. And I think that a lot of companies have that ability to target this kind of age group to get them buying the correct products and buying products that are actually sustainable, environmentally sustainable, for the people that are making these products. And I think more awareness that is put into and is built by the consumer and the people that are buying these products, and more awareness that we have about what we're consuming, the greater choices that we're going to make as a bottom line. So there's a lot of times what I've seen is there's a lot of disconnect between what we buy and how that affects the world. You know, when we buy water in a plastic bottle, it's not only affecting the way that the plastic was made, you know, where they got the water from, but also after you throw it away, where is it going to go? Different things like this, which every step of the way that thing has a life, that thing that they're buying, you know, because a lot of the things we buy in this country are single use. You know, we use them once, we throw them away forever. And so really understanding each step of the way, the things that we are buying, how they're being used, what it took, and the resources that it took to create it and, you know, dispose of it. So I think more awareness and from the public will really lead us to buy those brands that are doing better things and that are, you know, greater sustainability from all the brands that were on your page. You know, makes me more excited about supporting those products for sure. And so I definitely think that there's that the greater sense of knowledge about the things that we are buying is really good, because it will make better decisions. You know, when people think about Nike or different shoes companies, you know, we don't think about how the shoes were made or where they were made or who they were made by. There's such a sense of disconnect between, you know, the people that are buying it, the consumers, and the product. There's just a systemic disconnect there. If you look at anything, our food, anything, the way that we get it, there's a disconnect between, you know, that thing that we're purchasing, the thing we are consuming, and where it comes from, what energy it took. You know, the same thing when we eat meat, we don't understand how that affects climate change. When we buy shoes, we don't understand how that affects climate change, the world around us. Every decision that we make will affect our future. So beginning to understand the decisions that we make around purchasing the correct items is really important, especially for my generation, because a lot of kids buy a lot of stuff.
Thank you. And final questions. Yeah. And just introduce yourself.
Yeah. My name is Paloma Munoz. I work at the Danish Institute for Human Rights in Copenhagen. So first of all, thanks so much to all of the panelists. Your presentations were incredibly insightful and concerning. And my question actually really goes to the core, I think, of the issue that you're talking about now, the issue of raising awareness among consumers and essentially really changing the paradigm. So first, I guess a general reflection for the human rights and business community, the issue of engaging the media in this space. Media, for example, Fox News, I mean, these are corporations, this is human rights and business. I mean, they are shaping the discourse at that level. They should be in these conversations. So that's a bit of a point of reflection, and I don't think that we do that enough or at all. Mm-hmm. So that's one point. And then, of course, another way to change sort of the public discourse and ultimately the paradigm is art, music, right? All different other mediums that are not the ones that we're usually the one, you know, not happening at the UN, nor at the OAS. So exactly one of the key points, I mean, that I think that makes Mr. Martinez and his presentation so refreshing is music. Besides the fact that you're incredibly eloquent, but I think the issue around sort of art, music, media, how to ensure that the media is more responsible on the one hand, and that artists and musicians, I guess, are well equipped with information. Like, for example, to just know, yeah, okay, wait, what is the impact of sort of meat production or whatever? So if artists who are socially conscious really want to kind of raise awareness that's based on science, et cetera, that they're well informed. So that I think the engagement between sort of the human rights and business community and artists and music is actually another interesting area to explore. And then my question is actually to you, Mr. Martinez, is you know, why music? Why hip hop? What about that? I mean, you could have many other medium, I'm sure, to actually express yourself and your thoughts. So I'm hoping you could maybe share with us why you chose music and what you think, you know, that you can achieve through that. Thanks.
Cool. So I'll tie up both questions if I can. Kind of to answer the first question, my thoughts on the first statement, just about connecting, is, you know, I think for so many people that, you know, regular people that, you know, you see walking down the street, for so many people, their understanding of climate change is between corporate fossil fuel industries and activists. Like, that's like the relationship that people have with climate change, is, you know, the people marching on the streets and the people, you know, that are, you know, dumping, you know, oil into our oceans and, you know, also polluting our atmosphere with greenhouse gases. There's like, that's what we see is you know, the battlefront of climate change. People don't often look at businesses. People don't look at often lawsuits around climate change, which I'm a part of. You know, there's all these different mediums to take action upon climate change. So many people that need to be accountable for taking action on climate change. Climate change isn't just an environmental issue, it's a human rights issue, and I think we're starting to understand that finally. you know, I've been in this for the last 9 years, and like I'm finally starting to see a little bit of shift in the way that people think. It's not just about, you know, the certain people that care about the planet and that, you know, care about the trees that are going to do something about it. Excuse me. It's the people that are like, you know, every step of the way has a part to do. You know, we got business, we got artists, we got, you know, media. These are all different mediums in which people got to start taking action on climate change. Every sector needs to be responsible for climate change, because climate change is going to affect every living person on the planet. Bottom line of that. And just to answer the music thing quickly, sorry. Well, I mean, okay, check this out. Earth Guardians, go on our website, earthguardians.org, learn about our history, because it's ridiculously hilarious and very, very cool. Started out as an accredited high school in Maui, Hawaii in 1992. From there, it ended up in Boulder, Colorado. But pretty much the first generation of Earth Guardians, the OG Earth Guardians that, back in Maui, you know, they did hip-hop and they toured across the United States performing hip-hop. So along with, you know, the roots of hip-hop being a part and music being a part of the way that these young people that were taking action on climate change, you know, we were like, you know, how can we reach my generation? You know, because if I go up there and I give them a 2-hour presentation on climate change, the impacts it has on our generation, the way that it affects business and economy, like, nobody's going to care. No young person is going to, I mean, well, there are those few that will sit through a 2-hour lecture. But, like, I think about 15-year-olds and what they listen to and what they like and what they'll respond to, and it's that medium of hip-hop. Everybody's listening to hip-hop. A lot of hip-hop on the radio is garbage. You know, the messages don't mean anything. Nobody cares about what they're saying, and you know, it's ridiculous. So shifting, using something like that that's popular, that's hip, that's everybody's into, or a lot of people are into, and putting that positive spin on it, you know. Make sure that when they're listening to our lyrics, you know, they're down with the beat, they're down with the music, but they're also learning something. It's also something positive. We're spreading that consciousness through our words, through our lyrics, through our instrumentals, through our music, every step of the way. I mean, you know, I think we need less activists and more artists. I think we need less activists and more business people. We need less activists and more parents that care, or doctors. You know, separate the thought of taking action on climate change from being an activist, because that's not real anymore. What taking action on climate change means is doing whatever it is that you are, whether you're a business person, whether you're a CEO of a company, whether you're a hip-hop artist, whether you're a poet, whether you're a videographer, you know, whatever it is, we don't need activists anymore. Whatever it is you got, offer that and take action on climate change to the things that you can do.
Thank you very much. So I think it's time to draw our panel to a close, and offer our panelists just a 2-second final comment before we pass to Phil. I think there's some key messages coming out, though, that, you know, there is increasingly a clear business case. Perhaps that we're not articulating the business case as well as we need to be, both in terms of the risks to business from inaction, but also in terms of the opportunities that there are for those businesses that are able to move first. Recognition that business can't thrive on a planet where half of the world's population cannot participate in the economy, a planet where, you know, crops are not yielding the same as they used to yield, a planet where children grow up malnourished, where natural resources go scarce. So it is in business interests to actually take action on this agenda, not just as a moral imperative, but as an economic imperative, and we need to strengthen the business case. Secondly, that we if we do it right, we can actually create an inclusive economy. That there is an opportunity here, unlike the Industrial Revolution that we saw not so long ago, to create a new economic revolution that actually leaves no one behind. And that if we do that the climate justice way, we can actually ensure that the benefits of our responses to the challenges we face actually flow fairly to the populations and communities that are most in need. And finally, that there is a market opportunity here that we can create less volatility. And it's the volatility in the market right now, the shocks that are raining down on people day in, day out in places like Niger, where the capital of hunger, where you're seeing the real impacts on people's lives, that if companies take bold leadership in this agenda, we can actually reduce that volatility by looking at different ways of sourcing, ensuring that the supply chains and value chains across companies are building resilience, and that there's a huge opportunity here for humanity to enter a new era of development. And as we look at the week ahead, you know, there is real opportunity. So final comments from our panel, and then Phil close us out, and I think it's been a spirited discussion.
Yeah, so just to quote the motto from the People's Climate March, to change everything, we need everyone. And so when the work that we do in partnering with businesses to make sure that these various industries can transition from being something that happens to our communities to something that, to industries that transform to being more sustainable with our communities. And so we look forward to working with business and others to wrap arms around this issue and move us forward. So thank you.
Well, as we've clearly identified, I mean, business is a huge key to a lot of what we're trying to solve here. And what we need to see is enlightened companies, which we're seeing, take that leadership, take the risks. You know, maybe all the consumers won't come with you immediately, but take those risks. You have that leadership role, you have that opportunity. You've led in so many other ways in terms of building consumer demand for product. Now build consumer demand for an ethical and a green and a climate-friendly way of progression, and to encourage that race to the top.
So I would just leave you with the thought that climate change is only going to be addressed at scale. And I think that a lot of times we think we can feed 9 billion people out of window boxes. We can support urbanization of the world out of in a way that is somehow not done in mass. Climate change can only be addressed in scale. But the good news is scale and industry and commerce is incented to make this world better. And we have to support that. We have to work honorably to do it. There's no shame in making a profit along the way, but it's important that we act in responsibility of the people through the entirety of the value chain. And we do take a systems approach and look at how that behavior is making a difference in the world.
Take this. Perhaps for me, the final comment, endorsing everything that you said, but it's something that you said, Martinez said. It's not a concept that, you know, we have our role. It's an issue of ownership. It starts with each of us. It starts with you. It starts understanding our role and understanding our role, certainly across our business, but each one of us. Because when we talk about the issues of climate justice and human rights, etc., I always go around and I say, well, what does human rights means to you? And in general, it's about someone else. Everybody talks in third person. Climate justice, the same. It's about someone in Africa, it's about someone in India, but if we look into how we are making the decision, business and elsewhere, because when someone walks out of the company, it's just a regular citizen and vice versa. When we start putting under the microscope the decisions that we are making and really transforming, then we are going to start seeing a systemic change that is really what we need to do. And climate change and human rights, I mean, is not just a specialty. Is part of, you know, the 360 formula that we need to see, and cohesive collective action, really commitment from everybody, particularly people we are going to see this week. Is really critical to see this happening. Oh, no.
So 2 points to follow up on some of this discussion. First, there's been a lot of focus on business responsiveness to consumer pressure and enlightened business. And personally, I think Oxfam's Behind the Brands campaign has been immensely successful and a shining example of what consumer and public advocacy campaigns can accomplish. But I also think that there is a limit to the degree that enlightened business and consumer responsive business can get us there. And I don't work on that. I work on the hard cases. The fossil fuel industry is famously unresponsive to consumer pressure. And for good reason in this case, that what consumer pressure would push them toward is essentially going out of business. So the fossil fuel industry and the energy industry in general is going to respond to essentially hard pressure like regulation, and if the policymakers won't put regulation in place, then we move to litigation. So that's the first point. The second point is, in all the discussion of human rights and climate change, one of the key principles of human rights that I don't want to be lost in this discussion is that there should be no human right without a remedy. And there are communities all over the world today who are suffering violations of their rights due to the climate change crisis and who have no real remedy. In just Alaska, the native communities of Kivalina and Shishmaref and Nutak are literally disintegrating, and they will need to move. And somebody will need to pay for that. So should it be them, or should it be the companies and others who have profited immensely from creating this problem in the first place?
Well said, everybody. Yeah, I mean, shout outs to seriously all the incredible panelists that have shared their stories, shared the way that we want to collaborate, the way that we want to take action, the way that we want to move forward. It's about the solutions, not about the problem. I guess what I have to say, I was thinking really deeply about this, and if we can, okay, all right, let's think about fossil fuels and energy, right? So if the people of this country could shift every bit of energy that we get from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources, it would be great, right? But only because it would make them feel better about the energy that they're getting. They'd be like, they would still use exactly the same amount of energy, but it'd be just made somewhere else and from some other resource. Rather than burning fossil fuels, we're getting it from the sun, which is great. But we're still taking just as much. We're still using just as much. In the end, I mean, the only thing is the guilt part, right? That my actions are contributing to climate change. That's why I want renewable energy. What has to change is the understanding. We don't just need renewable energies. We need people to change. We need the way that people think to change, because the way that people think is that everything, the resources on our planet are at our disposal, and we can use whatever we want, how much we want, until the planet maxes out. And we think that we have infinite resources, but we don't. So people, the way that we think about the planet, we see the Earth as a resource. We see this Earth as a resource. The oceans, the forests, the mountains, it's a resource for us. And there's such a sense of disconnect that sets us apart from the Earth. It sets us apart from one another. That's why that's why there's war. That's why there's hatred. That's why there's racism, because we set ourselves apart. There's that sense of separation with the Earth, that sense of separation with ourselves, that sense of separation, So this sense of separation, I've seen these walls beginning to dissolve over the last couple of years, which is amazing. And it inspires me so much to see that representatives from different businesses and hip-hop artists can come together in a room and agree about something, right? When else has that happened? And we're breaking down the walls and we're breaking down the barriers, and this movement is becoming more diverse every time that we get together. It's got to continue to spread in diversity. This system of separation that holds us back from actual success, from actual concrete stability and action as a movement, that is falling away. There's no more room for it. We are realizing that no matter who we are, where we are from, the color of our skin, the God that we believe in, that doesn't matter anymore, because we're all working and uniting to create a better planet for our generation and those to follow, and that's what it's about.
Thank you very much for that rallying cry. I think the message is clear. The biggest contribution we can make to climate justice, to human rights, to the Sustainable Development Goals, whether we're citizens, companies, countries, is to change ourselves. And we need accountability for that transformation on a global scale. And we need to transform business models, we need to transform mindsets, attitudes, beliefs. And I think we need to pivot from aspiration to action. And hopefully coming out of this dialogue, the B team also would be happy to host that dialogue with the Business Human Rights Resource Centre. We really think that it's time to pivot towards action. We can implement on this agenda. We have limited time. We can't wait till 2020 when the new FCCC comes into place. As we look towards COP21, we need to recognize that we have little time. We need a deal in Paris that puts us on a safe trajectory, but we also need to urgent action in the 5 years ahead of us to transition the economy. So it's time to come together and collaborate and recognize that we need to put our differences aside, because this agenda is about all of us being in one ship together, in one boat together, recognizing that we sink or swim together. and it's time to walk in together in solidarity. So thank you to our panel, and over to Phil. Thank you.
The number of times one walks off from something like that and you've left your phone and then you have to... Anyway, so... But thanks very much, Rajiv, and thank you very much to the panel. And thank you very much to Heather for delivering Mary's speech and also the introduction that you made to Mary. I think, you know, I speak for all of us when we surely all wish Mary well in terms of her recuperation and that she gets better very soon. I think all I really wanted to say was a few final remarks, perhaps trying to sum up some of the things that I've heard tonight. The first thing is, it's really been an honour to be able to do this event in the Roosevelt House. And I think because we all know the contribution that the Roosevelts made, and particularly Eleanor made, with that extraordinary vision that she had for the freedom of fear, for humanity free from fear and want. And I think that sums up in many ways what we've heard tonight as the extraordinary challenge that we hold to create a future free from fear and want is an extraordinary aspiration, given what we know now is happening to the ecological crisis that we're in. I want to just say three quick things. Firstly, I've heard tonight that there is no individual salvation, that there is only a shared prosperity and a shared security together. So those that think that they can somehow find a way because they're richer than other people, that they will be able to somehow evade the consequences of climate change are deluded. And that's one of the reasons why there's a genuine, it's a massive collective action problem, but it's one of enormous common interest as well. And that's why business, you know, Unilever and General Mills, along with Oxfam and the NAACP, along with Earth Rights International and a hip-hop artist, can come together onto one platform. We will disagree. The movement must have disagreements, and we must disagree sometimes fiercely and feel that we're sometimes on the opposite side of the fence. But we must also recognize that there's a singular common purpose, and that those disagreements must never stop us acting together for when we have those common goals, and we have so many of them at the moment. So for me, it's also critically important that we recognize what it's going to take in terms of leadership and commitment to deliver the kind of transformation which is necessary for us to deliver an end to this ecological crisis in the future, and a future, therefore, for the next generations that we've heard. We've heard tonight that businesses are going to set goals, that they are setting goals, that they're then gathering the talent around them to find the solutions, that they're embedding the values of human rights and the values of reducing their carbon emissions in every aspect of their business. These are the leaders. We also know from Earth Rights International that there are other companies that are not doing anything of that nature. In fact, they're still making very large profits. So there's a massive difference between the climate makers, such as those that we saw in some of the logos that came up from Earth Rights International, versus those that are the climate takers, those that are actually having to deal with the consequences of that. But the leadership must know that they're going to be able to find solutions to this, and that we will be part of that solution. And you know, the group, the hip hop group that came up and sang for us, which was just phenomenal, they called for unity in diversity. And they talked, they showed the way in which we have to build, and Ed also spoke to this necessity to build new constituencies, bring every constituency together, this rainbow coalition that we're going to need to be able to really provide the kind of reputation risk that those oil companies, those carbon majors should face now and must face, but also the reputation reward that companies that are making the effort, that are showing the leadership, that are driving change throughout their businesses, that reputation reward must be massive in order to drive others in the same direction. So for me, it's tremendously important that we get that broad rainbow coalition together, because only in that way, I think, can we genuinely start to build the movement that will create the light of optimism that we all need for the future. So thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye. Oh. And I do have one announcement, which is, well, first of all, a huge thanks to all of you for coming tonight. But secondly, there's a reception, of course, upstairs, which you're all welcome to. We'd love it if you could all come and share your thoughts about this evening. There'll also be somebody walking around with a video, and we'd love it if people would just give us a short video statement of your own, which would just say what you would want business to do in terms of climate action. So that would be anything, and of course we want John and Marcella to be the first people to say that. So thank you very much, everybody.